Tonight, an escalation. President Biden is sending Ukraine a weapon banned by more than 120 countries. It's the cluster bomb. He says the Russians are using this banned bomb, so he's sending the same banned bomb to Ukraine to use.
And it was a very difficult decision on my part. And by the way, I discussed this with our allies, discussed this with our friends up on the Hill. And we're in a situation where Ukraine continues to be brutally attacked across the board by munitions, by these cluster munitions.
And if sending this banned cluster bomb is not alarming to many, the president also lets something slip, something the Ukrainians probably don't want Russia to know.
The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. The ammunition that they call them 155 millimeter weapons. This is a war relating to munitions, and they're running out of that ammunition.
And if you think that slip is bad, that the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition, the president lets slip that someone else is running out of ammunition.
And we're low on it.
The United States is low on it, low on this ammunition. And the president uses the fact that we are low on ammunition to supply Ukraine with the cluster bomb.
So what I finally did, took the recommendation of the Defense Department to, not permanently, but to allow for, in this transition period where we get more 155 weapons, these shells for the Ukrainians, to provide them with something that has a very low dud rate.
Low dud rate? No, he didn't say no dud rate. He said low dud rate. And therein lies the great potential danger to many citizens for many years to come, even after the war has ended. How serious, how dangerous is the use of the banned cluster munitions? The Biden administration spoke about them back in February 2022, just after the war started. Here's the president's former press secretary, Jen Psaki.
Is there a red line for how much violence will be tolerated against civilians in this manner that's illegal and potentially a war crime?
It would be. I don't have any confirmation of that. We have seen the reports. If that were true, it would potentially be a war crime.
Did you hear that? She said war crime. She said use of the cluster munition would be potentially a war crime. And now we are supplying them to Ukraine. Democratic California Congresswoman Barbara Lee is speaking out against the president sending cluster bombs to Ukraine.
Cluster bombs should never be used. That's crossing a line. They don't always immediately explode. Children can step on them. That's a line we should not cross. I'm hoping that the administration would reconsider this.
As the war in Ukraine officially passes 500 days, things are changing, dangerously so, and the world is watching. Meanwhile, President Biden is in Europe, about to attend the NATO summit in Lithuania. A member of the House Armed Services Committee is standing by. This is the record.
I think he's trying to work through how we can work through his existing problems.
World leaders from 31 countries gather tomorrow for the NATO summit, the annual NATO summit. President Biden's overseas trip complicated by his decision to send cluster munitions banned by more than 120 countries to Ukraine. What are these controversial weapons and why are they banned? Correspondent Sarah Williamson joins me. Sarah?
Good evening, Greta. Well, there is just so many reasons to be against the use of cluster munitions because they are just so unpredictable. Cluster munitions are a method of dispersing large numbers of tiny bomblets from the missile or artillery shell in the air so that they scatter over a large area. So they're not targeted, and we have seen so many civilians killed or injured by cluster munitions in Ukraine. What's also concerning concerning is the duds. Now, these are the submunitions that don't explode on impact, which means that they can explode at a later date if picked up or stepped on, likely killing the person. I heard you mention that President Biden spoke of a low dud rate. Well, the Pentagon estimates its own submunitions have a dud rate of less than 3%, whereas Russia's have a dud rate of 40%, making the vicinity targeted hazardous for several years to come. So this is why they are so controversial and why they are banned in 123 countries. The 2008 Convention of Cluster Munitions bans the production, transfer, stockpiling and use of cluster munitions in all circumstances. But neither Russia, Ukraine nor the United States are parties to that convention. Russia has been using cluster munitions extensively since the beginning of the invasion. Right here, you're looking at an attack from April 2022. This can kill hundreds, if not in the thousands, of civilians, which it has already. I was in Ukraine when 58 people were killed at this attack and just over 100 injured in a single strike on the train station in Kramatorsk. So I can attest to the indiscriminate and brutal nature of these weapons, with civilians being the primary target. Ukraine says that it will deploy them judiciously, as it is fighting on its own land after all, but we will have to wait and see how that all pans out, Greta.
Sarah Williamson, thank you. Texas Congressman Pat Fallon, member of the House Armed Services Committee and House Oversight Committee, joins me. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Greta. How are you?
Good. So I understand that the United States wants to help Ukraine and help Ukraine from the invasion by Putin. But these cluster munitions are different from the other weapons that we have been sending. And even though the dud rate may be 3% or less, they will kill so many civilians, even for times after the war ends. Why are we doing this?
Well, that's Joe Biden again. You scratch your head, because before the Russians even invaded Ukraine, he was dragging his feet, providing the Ukrainians with with deterrents that may have prevented Vladimir Putin from invading in the first place, and that was inexplicable. And then he essentially gave the Ukrainians a blank check when the Democrats controlled both chambers, and now he's upping the game, doing something he said he wouldn't do. So he can never really predict what Joe Biden is going to do, other than the fact of spilling certain secrets that, listen, we all get classified briefings. You have to be very careful when you talk to the media and talk in public about certain things that you don't want to let anything slip out. And I'm not going to comment on exactly what he said, but he should have said something to the effect of, you can never have enough artillery shells, because that's true in peacetime or wartime.
But this does escalate it. And he's even got his former press secretary calling it a potential war crime. And I've been places like in Iraq where ISIS has rigged soccer balls with IEDs, so a kid comes along and kicks it, blows himself up. Even after this war ends, if it ever does end, someone walking in a field is going to step on one of these, the duds, so to speak. And whether it's the duds from the Russians or us, it does put us sort of escalating, because if we're going to do it, well, now Russia's going to do more. And I just don't see the wisdom. Is this the best we can do?
No, we can do so much better. And I agree with you as well. This isn't the time or place. I would say, if I were Joe Biden, that all conventional weapons are at least on the table. That's not saying you're going to provide it, but you're saying that we're not going to tip our hat and let the Russians know our strategy, what we are going to do. He should be having Putin guessing what he's going to do, instead of always trying to figure out what, reacting to Putin. He should have Putin reacting to him. And so, no, I don't think at this stage, but I wouldn't rule it out in the future if something was dire. But it's more of a court of last resort, and it's preemptive. And I don't think he should have done it at this time, though.
In light of the fact that it's going to get civilians, I think that's a given. Even with the 4% or less, we're going to get civilians. Is that a war crime? Are we aiding and abetting Ukraine with a war crime? Are we participating? Because we know what's going to happen with this weapon. It's not an accident. We know what's going to happen.
Well, like you're saying, we know that, let's say we were to give them 1,000, that means that 40 of them aren't going to explode. And it's going to be a danger for years to come. And you don't want that on your collective conscience. We are better than Russia.
Is that a war crime, going after civilians, knowing the civilians?
Well,
it's not like sending a missile and making a mistake. We know this. We know what's going to happen.
If
the odds are high.
if you're deliberately targeting civilians, of course, that's a war crime. And you could argue that knowing that there's a 4% dud rate, that you're deliberately targeting them. It's one thing that I just wouldn't do at this time. I'd be giving them a lot more 155 millimeter artillery shells, which is what they need right now. And as I said, particularly when you're in a conflict, you can never have enough artillery.
Yeah, I mean, is there? I guess is there no other way to do it? I mean, look, people are divided in this country whether we should be spending money on this or not, and I get that to think. But in light of the fact that the president gets to make those decisions, he's the commander in chief. Is there no other way? He's meeting with all those NATO countries. I know we don't want to drag NATO into this conflict, but he certainly has. He can pick up phones and get the. Apparently, he says we're low on ammunition here. I mean, in that soundbite, I find it hard to believe that with this incredible military-industrial complex that the United States has, that Eisenhower warned us about in 1961, that we're running out of ammunition, so we're going to use cluster munitions, which we know are going to kill civilians, and that's where you cross the line into war crimes.
I think that was honestly just an excuse to really confirm his decision, Greta, because we can, as you said, do so much better. And there's a lot of our major NATO allies that don't support his decision. The British come to mind as one. So yeah, it's something I would have gone in a different direction a long time ago, quite frankly. But Joe Biden he can't get out of his own way is the issue.
Congressman Pat Fallon, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Greta. God bless.